Marketing has become more of a science than ever. And to make sense of how and why this is, I talked to Mbhele, the Absa Group Chief Marketing and Corporate Affairs Officer.
We have to recognize today and accept that marketing is a science.
Yeah.
And we've said for many years, it started off over-indexing on the creative side, part art, which is more the art part. Mm-hmm. At some point became part art, part science.
Yeah.
More and more, it's becoming more a science. And as it becomes a science, it's asking a lot more of the discipline. And we're not trained to be scientists.
We discuss how marketing and the creative industry in general can be more impactful. We also talk about how he ensures and increases campaign and creative effectiveness.
So here are the 5 things, that I personally use, amongst others, that can help. Is the work insight-led? Is it aspirational? Is it brand aligned? Is it captivating? Is it distinctive? Just take those 5.
For more conversations with creative industry and marketing thought leaders, please subscribe to The Lead Creative. Welcome to the Lead Creative Podcast, where we talk to creative industry leaders, influencers, and brands. We discuss the strategies that influence brand thinking and shape industries. Thought leaders and heads of agencies let us in on some of their thinking and insights. I'm your host, Mbhele. Enjoy the show, and please share and subscribe. Sydney, thanks so much for making the time. I suppose to start off, looking back, what do you believe got you into marketing, and how is it different now that you're here?
Mongezi, I collided with the discipline.
When
I was in matric, for example, I didn't know that I'll end up in marketing. I knew that I wanted to be in a corporate environment. I was not quite sure what it was. I was toying around going into accounting, but I knew that just my personality and demeanor probably would not, match that environment. Mm-hmm. And so I started my career in sales. After finishing university, I was chosen as part of a graduate program by one of the international companies, Frito-Lay International, that owns Simba in South Africa, and they own other different brands or companies. And to cut a long story short, my career started in sales, and in one of the organizations that I worked for, which was Diageo, at the time it was called Gilbey's. I used to interact with the marketing folk a lot, with the marketing directors, and when they came to present their quarterly or trimester activations and promotions to us sales guys sitting in the regions, I used to ask a lot of questions, and I used to make a lot of suggestions. And at times I used to send emails, on what I think they need to be running as the next promotion. And that's where the marketing director sort of identified my call it nascent, untapped abilities, and my interest in the discipline. And when a role became available, I didn't have a marketing qualification then. When a role became available for the biggest brand that they had at the time, it was Smirnoff. So I was given the opportunity as the brand manager. So that's how my career started, and I subsequently studied, of course, to amplify that, and then maybe to go to the second part of the question, which is how has marketing changed since then? I guess technology, I guess the way of the world, digital transformation, the accelerated pace of change, driven by that digital transformation, and the need to connect with with customers differently, or probably in a more personalized way.
Yeah.
So I think that's changed significantly, and this notion of attribution. You might
Yes.
know that someone, I think in the 80s, said, 80% of marketing is wasted. 50% of marketing is wasted. We just don't know which 50%.
50%. Yeah.
And I don't think you can say that today, because the world has moved on so much about how we can justify impact or track what we do. And that's why terms like performance marketing, things like MarTech, if you just combine the need to really account for the resources that get allocated to us by our organizations. And if you just merge that, the digital technology, the need to account, and what's come out of that melting pot.
Yes. One of the things that has become a hot topic, I think, on this notion of which 50% is wasted, right? One of the things that has become a hot leading topic in marketing and advertising of late is this idea of creative effectiveness and measuring it, and it being more and more measurable. Why do you think it's so important now, or it has become so important, and how do you measure it?
Well, the truth is, I guess investors are asking a bit more of organizations in terms of performance. And as they do to those who lead organizations, they themselves are then sort of forced to look at their own value chains and their own systems and organizations to see whether this thing called, cost to income ratio, which is now comparable against other organizations, is where it should be. And if you take an organization and you compare it to an organization that is the same size, investors are saying, should I be investing 1 rand here or in 1 rand there? And one of the factors that is important in that decision is how profitable an organization is.
Sure.
And what goes into how an organization becomes profitable is how it manages its costs. Because then it influences this thing we call positive jaws.
Yeah.
Where profits increase or total revenue increase while costs are going down, because that gives you the legitimacy and potential to be more profitable in a more sustainable way as an organization.
Sure.
So they also have to ask the marketing line and say, what are we getting for what we are giving you?
Sure.
So as a result, we've had to, as a discipline, justify what we are doing, account for it more so than I think we did in the past. So I hope it answers the first part of the question. How do you measure the effectiveness? How many hours do you have here?
I think
that's a really, really big question, right? Sure. What is important, I guess, is to build models that have an element of rigor that tells us, if I do this what happens. Cause and effect. Should I spend money in, maybe let me just make an elementary example. Should I be spending money on a billboard, or should I be spending money on radio? Or should I be spending money on both, maybe 50% of each on both? What informs that decision? And I think marketing people are asked to think a lot more harder and use models and now technology, but there's ways in which you can be able to deduce which of those strategic choices linked to an organizational strategy that you are trying to support and is giving you the best of impact, marketing impact. Hopefully marketing impact results in growth for the organization, or if you are not a profit-making entity, it results in perceptual shifts for what we are trying to do. Ultimately, that's really what we're trying to do. And I think, a lot of marketing people don't maybe do this sufficiently. And my organization, which is Absa, and it's a bank, when it goes out to report its financial results, they don't talk about brand consideration. They don't talk about, generally how many customers resonate. This is the language that we use in marketing. They talk about return on equity. They talk about, credit loss ratio. They talk about, cost to income ratio. Those kind of metrics which are measured by CFOs and CEOs. The responsibility for us as marketing people is to say, if you take ROE, return on equity, what is my contribution to that? You gotta decipher that and say, what are the things that I'm doing that are marginally making an impact, that are significantly influencing that, or that are not influencing it? And I must remove those that are not influencing it and choose those that are influencing it.
Yeah.
So you gotta...
Yeah. Sorry to jump in there, but that said, though, one of the complexities of this time, and this is something I wanted to come to later, one of the complexities, though, of this time, we're seeing this partly in South Africa's performance at Cannes, for instance, the recent Blu-rays that we saw where there were no Grand Prix awarded, right? So part of the complexity that a marketer then faces based on these metrics that you've just mentioned is the idea that as a marketer, you're also building brand, you're also building all these other things that are measurable over the long term rather than the short term. So one of the arguments that comes out of South Africa's performance in both these awards as examples is that businesses are very focused on the short term because of economic pressures, because of all the pressures that you've just mentioned. How then do we build brand and not only focus on the short term when CFOs are saying, show me ROE, show me ROI?
Yeah, maybe, but I'm not fully convinced, because even if your objective was to do work that delivers in the short term, there's ways, innovative ways, captivating ways that are distinct at which you can do that. And that can result in awards. So, I can't answer mostly for why there are no Grand Prix, and
Sure.
And maybe we are just going through a phase. Manchester United used to win a lot of trophies at some point. Now they're not. Manchester City, was nowhere. Now they're winning a lot. Maybe we're just going through a phase, and maybe it's just a coincidence that there is no great work. It may also be true, what I said earlier, that there's a lot of pressure to do things, and therefore creative superiority is deprioritized, not so much about short term and long term. Creative superiority is deprioritized in exchange for probably more impact, which is less dynamic maybe. And some of the things that build organizations are the simplest of things, are things that are not winning awards. So I think you got to understand that, and not blame, the wrong people for wrong things.
For sure.
And I think the Cannes one is a slightly different point.
Right.
And I made this point while in Cannes, and I did a number of interviews when I was there last year. I think this continent is different. And I want you to hear me out. A lot of the people who sit as, judges, jury presidents, etc., are people who are not coming from this continent.
Right.
And therefore, they don't understand the nuances of some of the things, and maybe insight led, but very relevant to this continent and very different to the rest of the world. Africa is not a country, it's a continent.
Right.
And it's got, I think, 3,000 or more, actually, languages. But very dense and deep in culture within each of those.
Right.
So if you're doing work and you're delivering work that's going to work, for Bedi people, who understand that nuance deeply.
Yes. Yes.
That work may not cut it in can. So there's a transformation that needs to happen in as far as how work is judged in those international platforms. I'll give you an example. One of the suggestions that I make is, well, have a category for Africa, at least in the short term, and get African people to sit as jurors of that category and be able to judge that work because they understand the dynamics and nuances of this continent in ways in which people outside of the continent may not be able to understand. And as a result, they might not get it. You might not get it, because its creative work has to resonate with the markets in which you operate. And unfortunately, our markets under-index in the global stage for those reasons. There may be work that we do that is universal, that can work anywhere in the world. But there's a lot of work that is really cutting edge and that is there on this continent that may not cut it anywhere else purely because it is difficult for other people to decode, the work and its impact. And
so I like that, and I want to ask something. And I want to ask something specifically on that because I know that you're also a marketer who's very passionate about the continent, who is, a marketing leader within this space that's exemplary, in Africa. Are you seeing a lot of work just generally, or even anecdotally, that you would say this really cuts it on the African context and would work on the global stage if it was better understood? Is that something that you are seeing a lot of?
Yeah, I do come across work. I mean, I'm not saying it's universally pervasive. Yeah. But I do come across work from time to time where you think, oh, that's really brilliant. And maybe the budgets are small, or maybe it comes from a small country, and maybe the work is not entered into these spaces, and therefore it doesn't get the exposure.
If you're enjoying The Lead Creative, please share this episode with your network and hit follow or subscribe. Enjoy the show.
So then it's not so much the long and short term, it's not so much the lack of brand building, but sometimes it could just be that the work doesn't resonate because it resonates so deeply at a continental level or at the
potentially. Look at it as a composite score. If we had a composite score, maybe there's a little bit about short term, long term. There's a little bit about, what I've just described. There's a little bit about, so it may be different reasons that aggregate to give us this problem. Yeah.
So on this debate about pressures and economic pressures that we've spoken about, as a seasoned marketing leader, you have seen changes in the space for over 2 decades, from banking, FMCG, you mentioned alcohol, telecoms, and everything between. Why are brands and their agencies responding differently now to economic pressures compared to how they would have over the past 2 decades that you've been at the helm of leading marketing at brands?
I'm not sure if brands are reacting differently. I just think we find ourselves in a different circumstance.
Right.
The world has changed. As I say, when I started marketing, there were no cell phones, maybe, or their use was very limited. Now, they're pervasive. So how you talk to people, social media, the advent of social media, and what's happened there. the boundarylessness of the world. People are traveling a lot more than they did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They are preoccupied by more channels on TV than they ever were before. And radio, if you were in a car, was the main thing. Now maybe people play music instead of listening to radio. So I just think the world has just shifted, and therefore we all have to adapt to this world, this new world. And what it requires is new tactics. Is that some of us who cut our teeth back then in marketing in a different circumstance, you have to upskill yourself, you have to adapt to this new world and understand it so that you are able to effectively represent your organization in the way that you should. So I think we're in just a different world, and some marketers adapt better than others. Others are much slower at doing it. The business is asking a lot more of us. When we get to boardrooms, often we become marketing people instead of business people.
Right.
So I think it's a fusion of all of these things that have landed us here. And I think we have to recognize today and accept that marketing is a science.
Yeah.
And we've said for many years, it started off over-indexing on the creative side, part art, which is more the art part. At some point became part art, part science.
Yeah.
More and more, it's becoming more a science. And as it becomes a science, it's asking a lot more of the discipline. And we're not trained to be scientists.
Yeah.
The training that we get is not quite the training that gets us to be scientists. So our analytical abilities, and I'm hoping that people who are building curriculum for future marketers in institutions of higher learning, for example, are people who have practiced marketing. Are people who have been at the helm of brands and marketing in big organizations, and are therefore, as we build the skills for future leaders, that they are taking some of these lessons because we got to think differently about it. My sense is that the aspects that we need to amplify a bit more in training the muscle, and the brain of what is this thing? What is this discipline? In today's world, people still think, if you are in my job, for example, you spend a lot of time looking at ads, approving advertising, and doing activations or that sort of thing. And there's a lot more that sits behind the scenes, which is about the business of it. I don't think we are trained sufficiently on the business of it. I went to an organization called Unilever at some point, and had I not been at Unilever, maybe there are a lot of things that I would not have been able to train. Because Unilever spent so much time, building sufficient capability for marketing people, because it recognized marketing as a lever for success. Unfortunately, not organizations do that. So as a result, we come out of different environments, over-indexing more on the wrong skills. Or let me not say wrong skills that should be, secondary, and the ones that should be primary, are probably, sort of overemphasized for other disciplines.
That said, I think a question that comes to mind for me then is that what you've just mentioned to me kind of also comes out of, in certain industries or certain spaces, it becomes a lot more scientific than in others. You mentioned Unilever. So in FMCG, for example, are you of the impression or opinion that it's more scientific in some industries, like in FMCG, like in some instances, financial services, but actually in other spaces, less so? As a result, we over-index on the wrong sort of things about the customer.
I think it's scientific wherever you are. It's understanding what is the proposition I'm going to take to clients. Where am I going to get that? Which clients? and how am I going to win, and what sort of metrics and results I'm going to use to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So that value chain, which we call loosely the conversion model,
Yeah.
that value chain we call the conversion model, is something that works anywhere you are. So I disagree that some industries more than others.
Okay. So something that came out of the South African CX reports is that consumers feel that they give brands a lot of data, and yet brands, they feel, use very little of that data to personalize messaging to them. Why is there such a disconnect, and how do we fix it as marketers?
100% true. 100% true. It may be a number of reasons. I've given you one. We are trained not as scientists, primarily trained as, part art and part science. So that may be that we are not able to commercialize that data. We don't have the skills.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that may be one of the reasons. Another reason is that it takes technology, marketing technology, to be able to do that effectively. And a lot of organizations haven't woken up to the need for that technology.
Right.
First-party data, zero-party data, third-party data, this thing we call data symmetry.
Yes.
How do you tap into it sufficiently so that you are able to drive performance from the marketing that you do? So if you don't have that and you haven't invested in the technology, it's difficult. Because you can't go spreadsheets. We've got 9.7 million clients in in retail South Africa, for example, business. 9.7 million. I can't put all of those in a spreadsheet. Okay, so I need technology.
Yes.
And as people interface with Absa in many different ways, I need to be able to take that data, and technology needs to help me to be able to translate it into something that is digestible, consumable, that builds or creates some insights, and then I can say we need to do this for this reason. So you need technology. So the first reason I've given you, the second reason I've given you. The third reason is that the value chains in many organizations are still very disaggregated. So, marketing does not have access to customer data to be able to use it effectively. So we haven't quite connected the value chains because marketing sits on the side and business sits somewhere else. And we haven't inserted ourselves at the seat in the table where we are able to actually use that data, access that data, and use it effectively. Value chains are just so disaggregated. Many organizations have different divisions. They still don't have a singular view of the client. So take a typical bank, and I'm not talking about Absa here. You could have a business, for vehicle finance. It is separate to a business for home loans. It is separate to a business for personal loans, separate to a business for transactional banking. And the merging of those, it still does not exist. So for many organizations, you find that sort of situation. And marketing folk just get lost in that.
And I think just to go back to, your mention of marketing being a science, is that when you start bringing those together, the science works more effectively for the customer.
There you go.
What are some of the ways that brands can be memorable to win the customer's attention in a world where we see less ads, in a world where there's on-demand content being consumed, and as a result, you tend to see brands less when when you're relaxed consuming the content that you consume? How then do brands still stand out?
Look, I think we generally, there's many reasons, and I could spend a full day Some of the things that I've said maybe contribute to that. But I think, in a lot of ways, we aim way too low as brands, just in terms of how we judge creative. Firstly, I'm just going to give you some of the principles that I use, okay, that hopefully start to elevate and reduces the margin of error of whatever you're churning out to be less memorable. So here are the 5 things, that I personally use, amongst others, that can help. Is the work insight-led? Is it aspirational? Is it brand aligned? Is it captivating? Is it distinctive? Just take those 5.
Yeah.
If you, at every single point, every single time you had to approve creative, you use that as a lens, you would definitely produce work that is above average. At best, that is memorable and great. So I just think we aim too low. We are not relentless. We are not obsessive on how to win. Over time, we are quite comfortable to settle for good.
Yeah.
And good is the enemy of great.
Let's just switch to this now issue of AI, because that also become a very significant part. I mean, you mentioned MarTech, and a lot of MarTech also relies on AI quite a bit to drive to that insight, to enable our brands to get better in that space. One of the things that's happening within the AI space, especially, I'm seeing this more and more in overseas content. I'm sure it's making its way here, where brands are reducing agency rates for the use of AI in their content, and they're writing clauses into those contracts that stipulate this. In your view, how will this affect the brand agency ecosystem when AI is becoming so much more pervasive in the creative industry?
It's going to be devastating for the industry. It's going to be devastating. But, we can't stand in the way of human progress.
Yeah.
The world is becoming more efficient and more effective.
Yeah.
And what it means is that everyone has to be innovative in finding ways to increase their revenue streams. When they shrink, they find other ways in which to grow. And we've seen brands who don't do that, businesses who don't do that, across industries. As the world changes, if you're not investing in new revenue streams, you'll always battle.
Yeah.
Think about meter taxis when Uber came to be.
Yeah.
And in many countries, you find them fighting Uber. Uber guides, instead of saying, how can we find different and interesting ways in which we can keep our slice of the pie.
Yeah.
So you can't stop, because the benefit out of all of this, ultimately, somewhere, hopefully, is the consumer, is the client.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the benefit is the client, is that when brands spend less maybe with agencies because of AI, is that money is not necessarily going back to the bottom line. I'm hoping that money is going to volume rather than the fewer things they were doing, because they can save on each of them. Maybe they can do more.
Yeah.
So agencies then don't get to lose that piece of the pie. Or, the money goes back to, fortifying the products, making them better quality, or better value-added services, or whatever. So ultimately, if the end goal is human progress, is effectiveness, efficiency of what we do, and the client is the benefit, then it's fine. Agencies need to think about how to keep themselves in business. And I guess because if AI is here and it's here to make some things, I'm very empathetic about AI and how it can, destroy some of the industries, like the modeling sort of world, or we do a lot of casting for ads and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that we can find creative ways. But the world will never stop doing these things.
Absolutely.
It's not just AI. I've just given you an example with Uber.
Yeah.
There'll be many more other things that change the world as the world progresses. On the one hand, we want innovation. When it's here, we then say, hey, it's chowing on the margins of agencies. Where agencies need to, they need to go on a boss berat. They must go to an Indaba and think about how to build their revenue streams beyond the traditional, ways in which they've done it.
How have you seen AI, though, being used effectively in the creative space, insofar as, I suppose, the banking industry or any other industries are concerned? Have you seen it enabling groundbreaking work?
Yeah. There's something we're experimenting with, for example, which is a platform that's going to help us to get to market much quicker than we did. So it reduces, what would have been a 4-month or 3-month process to a matter of weeks, or in some instances, a matter of days. That's going to make us a bit more effective. We can get to market much quicker. We can be more agile as an organization. That's great. But we are doing this with our agencies. So.
Okay. So that collaboration is still kind of there to enhance the work.
Absolutely. In the same as technology, think about technology in mining. Think about technology in industry, in manufacturing. Essentially, I think we spend too much time worrying about its effects on employment.
Yes.
And not how we can get human beings who are not replicable to play a slightly different role in it. And I think that's the question.
Yeah. So there are increasing calls for brands to address societal issues. How do then brands, I suppose, balance this sort of purpose-driven campaign idea, or at least purpose-driven campaigns, with the commercial objectives, given that society is asking different things of brands?
Look, I mean, I've seen a lot of discussions or debates around that.
Yeah.
My sense is that it's not either or. My sense is that you can be purposefully commercial. In the same way, you can grow profitably.
Yes.
In the same way, you can grow margins and grow volume at the same time. So I don't think it's an either. Brands can become purposeful. Purpose is so important because it's the center of gravity. It's the reason you exist. It's an existential question. And if you don't have that, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you doing? Are you in a game here? You are just shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
So purpose needs to anchor you. And every brand can have a purpose, whatever the purpose is. Don't think about purpose maybe as in it must feed people on down the road.
Yeah.
It can be purpose for many reasons. So each brand can be purposeful in its own way. And I think maybe we are lazy, particularly on lifestyle brands, to make them purposeful. There is a way to be. Take a brand like, what's this beer? Carling Black Label, and the infamous campaign about, GBV and building man of stature.
Yeah.
Here's a beer that says we stand for something bigger.
Yes.
For you to enjoy yourself, with this substance does not mean it must change you as a man. So I think people run away from it because we don't want to go back to what I started in this interview with you, which is science.
Yes.
This discipline has become more of a science than ever before.
Yeah.
And we don't invest enough time on the science part.
Right.
We spend so much time, even the agencies. I can tell you the awards that get given, it's more the work they see on TV, nobody says, how do I reward the person who demonstrated strategic ability? There's no category at Cannes that says that, let's not look at the work that churned out, let's look at the strategy behind the scenes.
Yes.
Nobody awards that because that's the science part. So we over-index on this rather than that. So we close over, at the top of the iceberg, and we leave so much, which is much more important.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by the digitally led customer experience agency, Roger Wilco. For all your customer experience, digital marketing, and web development needs, go to rogerwilco.co.za or rogerwilco.co.uk. You can also download the South African CX Report and the Township CX Report directly from their website, free of charge. Don't we all love something free every now and again, especially with insights, right? Now back to the show.
Sydney, in this hugely competitive banking space, Absa launched the Your Story Matters platform. How do you navigate the complexities of differentiating in an industry where the consumer experiences the banking industry almost similarly across the board, where it's fairly difficult to kind of differentiate? I mean, the Your Story Matters kind of does that. But then how do you navigate that difficulty?
No, thank you for the compliments. I'm going to try and be brief on this because I get very passionate about it, and I can spend the full day talking about how we got here. Here's the essence. Banking has become inaccessible.
Right.
Banking has become impersonal. Customers are an account number. They are not a name. And a lot of banking, because of that reason, are more in the space of utility and ease.
Okay.
Which is not talking to me. It's about them. Simpler, it's utility and ease.
Yeah.
Yes, customers want that, but anybody can do that and it's replicable. Or, if it's not that, they are in the space of progress. And I don't want to seem like I'm demeaning some brands, but think about the little payoff lines you see.
Yeah.
Quite nebulous. They are not specific to the tangible value for clients. Ours is a space that very few, if any, occupy. A space of care and empathy. I said banking has become impersonal, has become inaccessible, has been out of touch with the needs of people. And we are putting the customer at the center of it. And that's why it's Your Story Matters. It's care and empathy. Of course, it is not just this beautiful set of words that's going to win us customers. You may like it, the campaign, but that's not my metric of success. My metric of success is when we can deliver it as an organization. And we're in the process of doing that, of building it. But it's a long-term process. Nike took over 10 years for people to understand that just do it is actually about greatness. That in each of us, there's an element of greatness, that you got to tap into it. But they took the line as what it is in the most literal way. And I can give you many other examples. Hello Tomorrow, Emirates Airlines. So, Your Story Matters anchors us very deeply at the center of our customers. And it is not about us, it is about the customers. That if we can partner with them sufficiently, we can make sure that we help their stories to progress. We can enable new stories, and that their stories matter. Because nobody recognizes us today. Because we are just account numbers. And all of us say name. In Zulu, a greeting in Zulu is Sawubona. That means I recognize you. So recognition is deeply embedded in who we are as humanity. And your story matters seeks to do that, and hopefully it does change the course of how people see our business.
Yeah. So I think the other part that I'm getting is the differentiation lies in centering the customer, which is once again something that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about MarTech and technology and insights, where it's about really seeing the person and surfacing the person and the human being outside of everything else that you're getting, outside of the data or whatever it is that you're getting. So we usually have a question that our guest leaves for our next guest. So think of it as our previous guest or one of our guests passing the mic. And I had a conversation with one of your agency partners, the Chief Creative Officer of Absa, Mbhele, in the early stages of the Your Story Matters campaign. And the question he left for our next guest at the time, and I'd love to get your sense on it. So the question Mbhele left was, how can AI, which in his view wasn't necessarily built with African markets in mind, be used effectively to advance Africa in advertising, creativity, marketing, and beyond?
That's quite interesting. I wouldn't have looked at it that way. Technology is merely a platform.
Right.
What you put in as input enables you to generate something of meaning for the output. The problem with the continent, Africa in particular, and the complexity of our continent, because it is not homogeneous. It's got lots of nuances, 3,000 languages, so many tribes, etc. Is that people who are at the forefront of building these technologies don't quite understand the continent. So the insights are very thin. So if we can build a repository of the insights that are relevant to us, whatever we put in as input into these technologies or platforms will enable that we get the right kind of output. I'm a bit surprised that he said that because, at an elementary level, I've been able to generate AI images that are reflective of people on the continent. I'm just using that at a very elementary level.
Yeah.
What I'm experimenting with my team now around reducing campaign process with this AI tool that we've got. From 3 months process to a matter of days has not necessarily taken away from the quality of the output. So I just think it's more on the insights. Again, I'm going to take you back to science. We are not scientific enough. We over-index on creative. And this discipline today, it's high time that people start to recognize it as a science more than it is the art.
And the last question for you, Sydney, is if you could leave a question for our next guest about their approach on marketing, creativity, or life, what would that question be?
Okay, that's very interesting. One of the questions, and I know it's a conversation that's been at play for a very long time, but one of the questions that keep me awake is this notion of measurement. Because that builds credibility. A lot of us talk at 50,000, 30,000 feet above sea level. When we talk about impact in marketing.
Right.
What is their take on what the next frontier is as far as marketing measurement is concerned?
Fascinating question. Fascinating. I'm going to pose that question back to you, though. I know it's your question, and they'll answer it, but I want to pose it to you. What have you thought? What would you think is that next frontier?
I don't know.
No, I'm sure, but I'm sure you've given it thought, though.
I also need counsel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I told you earlier.
Yeah.
I said the problem is when my CEO goes and presents results,
Yes.
financial results, he talks ROE, return on
Yeah.
equity.
Yeah.
He talks cost to income ratio. He talks credit loss ratio, etc. The crux of how we justify our reason for existence as marketing people is to
Yes.
take that concept, ROE,
Yeah.
and you got to dissect it and say, what is my contribution to ROE? What are the things that influence ROE at an organizational level, at a functional level, at a departmental level? And then when you get there, you say, what are the levers I can pull that can marginally impact it, that can significantly impact it?
Yeah.
And that's where I make my strategic choices.
That's it. Sydney, thank you so much for making the time. There's a lot that is really insightful out of this conversation. I appreciate your time. And I think the biggest thing that I take away from it is the science, which you mentioned quite a lot, but also using the science to surface the human being in what we communicate and how we do it as brands, beyond every other thing that exists, beyond the awards, beyond the work that looks or feels shiny to the industry. I think just surfacing the person and being more scientific about it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Lead Creative. Did you get one insight that's worth sharing from this episode? Please share it with your network or your friends. Pop me some of your ideas and innovative finds on Twitter on @Mongezi. This podcast is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find me on mongezi.com.